Hello, I'm Tyler Clark, founder and co-creative director of Lucid Studios. This is Real Reflections, and today we're going to talk about who the hell is Alex Garland and why you should care. We can do the housekeeping stuff. Big news. The podcast will now be available going forward on Spotify as well. So very excited about that. And so probably available on some other platforms soon. So this week, in honor of Civil War coming out from writer-director Alex Garland, who has been one of my favorite writers and over the last few years become I think, quite an interesting director, especially in the realm of sci-fi, which is, as I've said on here many times, one of my favorite genres. Some people know, some people may not know that he actually started out as a novelist. His first novel, The Beach, was bought by Hollywood and then turned into a film directed by Danny Boyle, who Garland ended up being kind of a partner with over the next few years. He would go on to write several scripts that Danny Boyle would direct that really kind of catapulted him into Hollywood. The first one was The Beach was in 2000. 2 years later, Garland writes 28 Days Later in 2002, also directed by Danny Boyle, starring our boy Cillian Murphy, Naomi Harris, Christopher Eccleston. Pretty great cast. Like looking back on it 20 years later, or more than 20 years later. And then Garland also writes Sunshine, that comes out in 2007. That's released in 2007, also directed by Danny Boyle, also starring Cillian Murphy. Another great cast in this one. Cillian Murphy, Rose Byrne, Chris Evans, Cliff Curtis. And then Garland also wrote, I guess the last screenplay he wrote before he started directing was the 2012 remake Dread, starring Carl Urban. And there are several accounts online that he actually kind of did direct this one, which I'm partial to. I mean, I like both of them. I like the original with Stallone because it's so 80s and or 90s, I guess. Did that come out? Yeah, in the 90s. It's super 90s. And but then I thought the new one was like a solid remake. You know, it like held true to the original, but also was like very modernized and also has Lena Headey, Queen Cersei's in it as the antagonist. So he really got his start as a writer, and unless we're talking writer directors like Tarantino or Paul Thomas Anderson, they really just don't get the same credit in Hollywood. So he was doing a lot behind the scenes, and then in 2014, he gets his first shot at directing, and it's another original script. And this was Ex Machina, starring Alicia Vikander, Domhnall Gleeson, Oscar Isaac. And Ex Machina is when Garland really blew up. I've always loved Ex Machina. I didn't realize how many awards it won. And I'm just going to read a few off. And Best Visual Effects, and Garland was nominated for Best Original Screenplay. The Oscars that year also got 5 nominations at the British Academy Film Awards. This is when we really first get that true taste of what Garland's about and the themes he's interested in looking into and the types of stories that he wants to tell. It's very intellectual, you know, a lot of basically it's just people sitting in rooms talking, having conversations about, you know, what it means to be alive, what it means to be human. But as we start to see with Garland, the films and TV show that come after, he's very much also interested in the dark side of humanity and the ways in which we lie to each other, use each other, hurt each other, and be self-destructive. But Ex Machina is I'm not really ranking these. I'm just kind of going through like his history before I talk about Civil War. But this one is my personal favorite of his films so far. and it's available on Max right now or available on Prime. So then in 2018, he adapts a novel called Annihilation. I haven't read, but from what I've heard, the film is a pretty big departure from it, except for the general idea that there's this entity that they've nicknamed the Shimmer in a remote area of the northeast part of the country, and all the people, equipment, etc., that they've sent into the Shimmer, like nothing has come out. No signals come out, no people come back out, and I think it's really good. It's, I'd say, more of an adventure, a dark adventure for sure, but then it also dips into psychology of human behavior, and I think that's where it kind of might be uneven for a lot of people. I really enjoy it. I think it's got some great performances from Natalie Portman, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Tessa Thompson's in it as well, in one of the first roles I can remember seeing her in. I'd recommend it. Annihilation, available to stream for free on Pluto. And then in 2020, Garland writes and directs The Devs is an 8-episode TV series that Garland wrote and actually directed all 8 episodes, which I think is pretty unheard of in most of the TV shows. I see they have different directors for each episode, but it's a pretty complicated story, so I'm not really, like, a basic synopsis is a young computer programmer played by Sienna Mizuno. I hope I said her name right. She's in a lot of Garland stuff. Start seeing her pop up if you go back and watch some of these. Her and her partner work for this very large, very futuristic tech company called Maya. Her partner gets called into this secretive division they have there called Devs, which nobody knows really what it does except for the people who work in it. And then a couple days later, he disappears and commits suicide. Basically, this is all in the pilot episode, so I'm not spoiling anything for Devs. And things aren't right for, I think her name is Lily. I think the character's name is Lily, but things look off to Lily, and she thinks the company's involved somehow, or there's something fishy, and so the rest of the series is her trying to get to the bottom of her partner's behind her partner's suicide or disappearance. And there's a whole other side to the show that's the actual company of Maya, led by the CEO is played by Nick Offerman, who also plays the president in Civil War, that we'll be talking about in just a little bit. And the experiments, I guess, that he is, or the project that he's and his company is working on, that they're so secretive over. So it's more sci-fi from Garland. It's also like kind of a mystery, a little bit of a detective story for the main character. And then from the CEO's perspective, Nick Offerman's perspective, it's kind of a psychological, more of a psychological debate, I guess you'd say, on destiny, predetermination. Like, it gets pretty deep. So I highly encourage, if you have Hulu, definitely check Devs out. It's got a similar tone, I think, and production design feel to it that Ex Machina does. So if you're into that kind of like look and feel and tone, then Devs is kind of right up that alley, which is probably one of the reasons I enjoy it so much. And then in 2022, Garland wrote and directed. This was, I think, his first film for A24, a film called Men, starring Jesse Buckley, Rory Kinnear, and I'm going to screw this name up, Papa Isidiu. And this was a pretty strong departure. No science fiction element to this one at all. It basically follows a young woman played by Jessie Buckley who goes on vacation after a tragedy to try and, I guess, heal, recuperate in the English countryside after her ex-husband's death. Once she gets out to the countryside, things start to appear off to her. Very different from his earlier works. Like there's no science fiction aspect to it at all. It's purely psychological, which I enjoyed. It was a lot to take in at first. It's a lot more about the atmosphere and the vibe that he's setting with the score and Jessie Buckley's performance. I mean, he focuses a lot on her face, and she's really excellent at. I hadn't really thought about it until just now, but conveying so much emotion without using words. The cinematography was made a lot of the shots that should be beautiful, like more eerie. I guess that was in combination with the score. Very different. On IMDb, it's one of his lowest rated, which I guess it just didn't connect with people. Kind of how I felt about Enemy when I was going back through Denis Villeneuve stuff. So this one, even though it's a lot more intellectual as well, it worked for me a little bit better than Enemy did. So if you're into psychological thrillers, this isn't one I would just casually go out and say like, you should check out Men. But if you're into psychological thrillers, if you like movies or films that are more about aesthetics and atmosphere and interpretation, then yeah, definitely check out Men. It's available on Max and Prime as well. It's also available on that's so weird, random, Paramount Plus with if you have a subscription there. And Alex Garland's latest film, The Civil War, which opened in theaters a couple of weeks ago, I thought it was great. I thought it's another departure from, which we knew going in, right? It's Civil War. We knew there was no science fiction element to it. I felt, as the title says, it's a war movie. And war movies are kind of fascinating. I've seen quite a lot of them over the years, and I guess there seem to be two primary types. You have the realistic, grounded type, like a Saving Private Ryan or Platoon, and then you have the more existential types of war movies like Apocalypse Now, or is it Thin Red Line, or Casualties of War. Full Metal Jacket is kind of a blend, and honestly, that I'm not comparing this movie. I'm not saying at this moment that Alex Garland's Civil War is in the same conversation as Full Metal Jacket, because I know that it's not, but there's tones of it to me, and maybe it's because, let me just say, so in Alex Garland's Civil War, he chose to follow journalists, specifically photojournalists, played by Kirsten Dunst. Wagner Moura from Narcos fame plays a traditional journalist, a writer, and Kaylee Spaney. Subscribers of the channel will know we've seen her a lot as Priscilla, another A24 film from last year. She plays a young newbie, I guess, just trying to get into photojournalism. And so Garland's story follows them as the civil war between the traditional United States forces and what I believe it's the Texas-California Federation are winding down. So the war's almost over. The Texas and California forces are closing in on Washington, D.C., where the president, played by Nick Offerman, is believed to still be. Kirsten Dunst's character, I believe her name's Lee, Wagner Moura, decide that they want to make it to D.C. or get pictures and an interview with the president before he's killed by the Texas and California forces. So it's a war movie combined with a road trip movie. And so we spend the next, hour and a half or hour and 40 minutes as they're driving I think it's like 800 plus miles from New York, where they start out, to Washington, D.C. And as they're making the trip, it becomes, and then I think this is where the Full Metal Jacket kind of comes. You don't know, Full Metal Jacket followed a Marine photojournalist, and as he gets sent out into the field for the first time, he's kind of waking up to like what's really going on around him in the war. And that's kind of how it is for the Kaylee Spaney character. She's kind of our audience avatar, where you have Kirsten Dunst, who's been doing it for years and years and years and is super seasoned, on the verge of burnout. Her eyes are dead. Great job, by the way. Like, fantastic performance from Kirsten Dunst as this dead-eyed photojournalist. That's all I kept thinking. Like, every time they showed her face, like, Jesus, her eyes look so dead. But then you have the flip side of that coin with Kaylee Spaney, who is all eager and has never seen anything like this, and essentially their journey deeper and deeper into the countryside and closer to DC, that they start to encounter and have to deal with escalate. It's that Heart of Darkness type of journey, which I think is why Full Metal Jacket keeps coming up for me so much. Where this doesn't rise to the level of that story is the characters are really, I don't want to say surface level. There's a little bit more depth given to Kirsten Dunst, to Lee's character, and Kaylee Spaney's Jesse, but not much to the others. And I think that was by design. By not bogging those characters down, it allowed, like, the film is very visceral. Like, there are a lot of, not body horror, but I'd say horrifying images that are like, he wants you to take in and feel, and then you kind of move on to the next one. And the film's very propulsive. It keeps you moving. It's a very much a roller coaster, which I think, again, is intention. I think he did everything he wanted to with this movie. It was simple in the areas it needed to be. And what I mean by that is, we're brought in at the end of the war, right? We don't get bogged down in how the factions came together and how on earth California and Texas could agree to anything, much less like a revolution against the federal government. So we're not bogged down with all that. All we know is, like, yep, it happened. We're here. Well, now it's almost over. So we just get to see different parts of the country in this insane state, where in one town they're pretending nothing happens, and in another town there's war crimes happening. So the Jessie character is our avatar to that, and she does a tremendous job at it. I think her performance was excellent as well. I think all the performances were excellent with what they were given. I just think that, like, Wagner Moura, who we saw do, if you saw Narcos, you know what he's capable of. But while his character is fun, and I think he's a little bit of comic relief and a little bit of, like, heart, like, there's just not a whole lot to his character. I thought it was a film of contrast, right? There was so much contrast of these scenes where things that we traditionally associate with being beautiful or being safe, and then superimposing these horrific images on top of them, like burned out tanks in front of JCPenney, or a pile of bodies, on Main Street in New York. Great performances, propulsive plot, beautiful cinematography, fantastic sound design. I think another complete package from Garland, and I hope people will check it out. If you don't get a chance to see it in theaters, definitely I'll remind you again when it comes out on streaming. All right, so that's going to do it for me this week. Next week, we're dipping back into the MCU. I think we're being a little bit hard on the multiverse saga, especially after watching the Marvels and going back and watching a little bit of the other stuff. So we're going to talk about that next week. Until then, take care.